Find the inverse of the function f of x is equal to the cube root of 4x plus 5. First of all, let's recall what it means to find the inverse of a process. Suppose I put on a pair of socks and then my shoes. How do I undo that process? Well, first of all, I would have to take off my shoes and then I would take off my socks. Notice that we have to reverse the order as well as apply the inverse operations at each step. The same thing holds true when we're working with a function. Let's write out the process for finding f of x. F of x represents the output when the input is x. So we find the input in our function and ask ourselves, what is the order of operations that takes place? Well, the first thing that we do to x is we multiply by 4. After we multiply by 4, we need to add 5 to the result. And then finally, we need to take the cube root of the result. Now that we've written out the process for f, we can write the process for f inverse. We reverse the order and apply the inverse operation at each step. So we start at step number 3 and we think of the inverse operation of taking a cube root. Well, the inverse operation is to cube. Then we think of the inverse operation of adding 5. That's subtracting 5. And finally, we need to undo multiplying by 4. That's dividing by 4. So to find f inverse of x, we just apply the 3 steps. First of all, we cube x. Then we subtract 5 from the result. And finally, we divide that result by 4. So f inverse of x is equal to the cube of x minus 5 all over 4. An alternative way to find the inverse of the function is as follows. First of all, we start off with y is equal to f of x. But we know that f of x is the cube root of 4x plus 5, so we make that substitution. We now solve this equation for x in terms of y. So our first step is to cube both sides. When we do so, we get y cubed is equal to 4x plus 5. Our next step is to take away 5 from both sides. We get y cubed minus 5 is equal to 4x. Our last step is to divide both sides by 4. We get y cubed minus 5 all over 4 is equal to x. Notice as we solve for x that we followed the same 3 steps as we had used previously. We cubed both sides, then we subtracted 5 from both sides, and finally we divided both sides by 4. We started off with y is a function of x, but we've ended up with x is a function of y. This new function is our inverse function, and so we call it f inverse of y. Now in this new function, y is the input and x is the output. But traditionally we use the letter x to denote the input and the letter y to denote the output. So our last step is to interchange the x and y to obtain our final result. Our end result is that f inverse of x is equal to x cubed minus 5 all over 4, which matches our previous result.